For centuries, the story of Sodom has been reduced to a simple cautionary tale about a single sin. It's often been used as a symbol of moral failure, but the truth is far more complex and deeply relevant to our lives today. But what if that interpretation misses the real point? What if the lesson isn't about individual wrongdoing but about the collective choices of a society? The real story is about a society that lost its conscience and turned its back on the vulnerable. It's about a community that became blind to suffering, choosing comfort over compassion. Sodom's downfall wasn't about private acts, it was about public decay and the normalization of cruelty. When neglect and indifference become the norm, the very fabric of a community begins to unravel. The story is a mirror, warning us of the dangers when a society forgets its duty to protect the weak and stand against injustice. It asks us to reflect on our own actions and the choices we make as a community. When we look deeper, we find a lesson about social responsibility. The ancient warning is not just about avoiding wrongdoing, but about actively seeking to do good. Sodom's destruction was the inevitable result of a community rotted from within. The city's collapse was not sudden, but the outcome of years of neglect, arrogance, and a lack of empathy. Its people were proud, overfed, and unconcerned, refusing to help the poor and needy. They built walls of indifference, isolating themselves from the struggles of others. Their sin was a collective failure of compassion, a societal embrace of selfishness. When kindness is replaced by apathy, the seeds of destruction are sown. This isn't just ancient history, it's a warning for our own time. The echoes of Sodom can be heard in the challenges we face today, in every city and community. We see similar patterns of corruption and indifference in our world today. The temptation to look away, to ignore injustice, is as real now as it was then. By understanding Sodom's true failure, we can recognize the warning signs in our own communities. We are called to notice, to care, and to act. The story is a timeless call to action, a reminder that the strength of a society is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable members, and that real change begins with each of us. The story of Sodom reaches its climax at Lot's door, where two divine guests seek refuge. Lot's act of hospitality puts him at odds with the city's violent culture. A mob surrounds his house, demanding to assault his guests. Lot pleads with them, even offering his daughters in desperation. A shocking, tragic choice. This wasn't about desire, but about protecting his guests at any cost in a society where decency had collapsed. The mob's response reveals the city's utter depravity. The innocence of children meant nothing. Lot's offer is a grim reflection of a world where the vulnerable are sacrificed when adults fail to stand against evil. The scene exposes a society where even family bonds are dissolved by violence. Lot's terror-driven actions warn us. When adults compromise with evil, children pay the price. Sodom's corruption was total. No one was safe. The mob's demand wasn't about sexual desire. It was about violence. A raw and terrifying urge to dominate at any cost. Their shouts and threats were fueled by a need to assert control, to remind everyone who held the power in the city. Their goal was to humiliate and destroy, not to seek relationship or love. The violence was meant to send a message, to instill fear and submission in anyone who might challenge them. The fact that the guests were male was incidental. The real motive was predatory power, a desire to break the spirit of outsiders and reinforce the mob's dominance. When Lot offers his daughters, the mob's rage only grows. They want to break the strangers, to make an example of them, and to punish anyone who dares to intervene. Their violence is indiscriminate, directed at both the vulnerable and those who try to protect them, showing a complete disregard for innocence or mercy. This was about asserting control through brutality, using fear as a weapon to maintain their grip on the city. Framing Sodom's sin as an issue of orientation sanitizes the horror. The real story is about systemic, violent abuse, a culture where cruelty was normalized and even celebrated. The Bible is clear: the mob's intent was wicked, violating the sacred laws of hospitality and humanity, shattering the bonds that should have held their society together. Sodom's society had lost its moral compass. Violence was the language of power, and compassion had been silenced by fear. The story condemns predatory violence and the abuse of power, not personal identity. It's a warning against letting cruelty become the foundation of a community. The men of Sodom were predators, not lovers. Their actions were calculated to destroy, not to connect. Their devotion to violence was a spiritual cancer infecting the entire city, a darkness that ultimately led to their downfall and serves as a stark lesson for all generations. Centuries after Sodom's destruction, the prophet Ezekiel revisits its story, offering a strikingly different perspective on its downfall. Instead of focusing on sensational acts, Ezekiel clarifies Sodom's true sin, shifting the narrative from individual wrongdoing to a collective, moral failure. Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. These words cut through centuries of misunderstanding, revealing a society that thrived materially, but failed ethically. Sodom's guilt was not hidden or private. It was a public, systemic failure. Their prosperity was visible, but so was their lack of compassion. The city's wealth stood in stark contrast to the suffering of its most vulnerable citizens. Their abundance bred arrogance, not generosity. Instead of sharing their fortune, they built walls, both literal and figurative, between themselves and those in need. They hoarded wealth, blinded to the suffering around them. The cries of the hungry and the desperate were drowned out by the clinking of coins and the laughter of the privileged. This was a deliberate policy of indifference, not mere neglect. Leaders and citizens alike chose comfort over conscience, turning their backs on justice and mercy. Their collective arrogance justified cruelty and allowed abuse to flourish. The powerful protected their own interests, while the weak were left exposed and forgotten. Sodom's sin was failing to act, failing to care, and failing to protect the weak. Their silence in the face of suffering became their loudest condemnation. Ezekiel's words force us to see Sodom as a city of privilege that abused its power. The city's downfall was not just about what they did, but what they refused to do for others. The uncomfortable truth is that a society can be condemned not only for the evil it commits, but for the good it fails to do. Indifference, inaction, and exclusion are themselves forms of injustice. Prosperity without compassion is a curse, turning abundance into isolation and plenty into emptiness. Sodom's legacy warns us, ignoring the cries of the poor leads to destruction not just for individuals, but for entire communities. The real danger is a society that hoards its blessings and turns away from the needy, forgetting that true greatness is measured by how we treat the least among us. The Midrash expands the story, showing Sodom as a place where cruelty was law, helping the poor was a crime, kindness was punished by death. One tale tells of a young woman who secretly fed a starving man. Her reward was a horrific execution, her crime, compassion. Another story describes the bed of Sodom. Travelers were tortured to fit it, symbolizing a society that twisted justice for its own amusement. These stories reveal Sodom's evil wasn't a momentary lapse, but a systemic, legally enforced culture of cruelty. Leaders and citizens alike built a world where the vulnerable had no rights. Sodom inverted every standard of decency, punishing love and celebrating hatred. The Midrash captures the spirit of evil the prophets condemned. Sodom's true face, a society that chose to be evil, crushing compassion at every turn. This is the chilling legacy we're warned against. Sodom's story is a living warning for our time. The same sickness, arrogance, indifference, abuse of the vulnerable exists today. We see it in governments, corporations, and institutions that protect the powerful and exploit the weak. Modern parallels include the trafficking and abuse of children, often hidden by systems that value reputation over justice. When institutions fail to expose predators, they become complicit in Sodom's sin. The arrogance Ezekiel described is alive in leaders who dismiss suffering and in cultures that celebrate wealth at any cost. Indifference to the poor and vulnerable is a symptom of the same disease that destroyed Sodom. The lesson: look beyond individual acts, recognize patterns of systemic sin. It's easy to condemn a criminal, harder to confront a corrupt system. Sodom's story demands we ask, who is being exploited? Who is ignored? Where is injustice normalized? Ignoring these questions is not an option. The Sodom narrative is a call to protect our children, the most vulnerable among us. When society's morals collapse, children are the first to suffer. Lot's daughters remind us, children become the currency of adult compromise. Our duty is to build a world where their safety is sacred. We must resist abuse, especially when it's systemic or hidden. Silence in the face of evil is complicity. Protecting children means building a culture of justice and integrity, not just reacting to threats. We must demand accountability and create safe systems for victims to speak. The true measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable. Our task: be guardians, protectors, and voices for those who have none. Knowing Sodom's story isn't enough. We must act. First, educate children about injustice in age-appropriate ways, equipping them to recognize manipulation and question corrupt authority. Model integrity and compassion. Children learn most from what we do. Treat everyone with dignity, especially those Sodom despised. Separate from media that normalizes cruelty or sexualizes children. Build strong, supportive communities committed to truth and protection. Accountability and transparency must be real. Children need trustworthy adults. Be vigilant, know who influences your children, monitor their media, and keep communication open. Involvement in their lives is protection, not overprotection. Create a home where children feel safe to speak up. We are the gatekeepers of their hearts and minds. Sodom's story isn't just about the past, it's a prophecy for the future. Its ruins warn. Indifference to suffering is fatal. The city fell not by arbitrary judgment, but by the consequences of its own choices. Today, we see the same warning signs: arrogance, cruelty, and indifference. The spirit of Sodom tempts us to look away and stay silent, but the story also offers hope. Lot stood against the mob, proving that doing right still matters. We are called to be protectors and voices for justice. The fate of our society depends on whether we protect the vulnerable or exploit them. Indifference is not neutral, it's fatal. Let us choose to see, care, and act, so our legacy is one of blessing, not ruin.